He thought his seven-figure suit and his billion-dollar empire gave him the right to treat people like trash. He thought his deaf son was broken, a burden to be hidden away in the corner of a VIP booth. Richard Sterling, the tech mogul of New York, laughed in the face of a waitress, mocking her, pointing a finger at his own child and sneering, "Go ahead, talk to my deaf son if you're so smart." He wanted to humiliate her. He wanted to break her. But he didn't know who she was. He didn't know that the woman pouring his water was about to teach him a lesson that money couldn't fix, and the entire restaurant was watching. This is the story of how arrogance met its match, and karma speaks louder than words. The lunch rush at L'Obsidienne, Manhattan's most pretentious and exclusive French bistro, was not for the faint of heart. It was a choreographed chaos of clinking crystal, hushed business deals, and the overpowering scent of truffle oil and desperate ambition. For Sarah Miller, it was simply Tuesday, and Tuesday meant her feet were already throbbing inside her mandatory black non-slip shoes before noon. Sarah adjusted her apron, smoothing the stark white fabric over her waist. She checked her reflection in the polished brass of the waiter's station. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe regulation bun, and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, save for a touch of mascara. She looked like exactly what the management wanted: invisible, efficient, a seamless part of the furniture. Table 4 needs a refill on the sparkling Sarah. "Chop chop," hissed Brenda, the floor manager. Brenda was a woman who smiled with her mouth but never with her eyes. She held a tablet against her chest like a shield. "And fix your collar. You look like you just woke up." "Yes, Brenda. On it," Sarah said, her voice steady. She didn't let the irritation bleed through. She couldn't afford to. At 26, Sarah was supposed to be in a clinical office in Chicago, finishing her residency. She was supposed to be wearing a lab coat, not an apron. But life had a way of pulling the rug out from under you when you were looking at the ceiling. 2 years ago, her mother's diagnosis, early onset Parkinson's, had drained the savings account, then the emergency fund, and finally Sarah's tuition fund. So, Sarah had come back to New York, taken the first job that paid decent tips, and buried her past life under trays of escargots de Bourgogne. "He's here," a busboy whispered, rushing past Sarah with a tray of dirty martini glasses. "The wolf is here." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. The ambient chatter dropped a decibel. Heads turned toward the heavy oak doors at the entrance. Richard Sterling strode in like he owned the oxygen in the room. He was a man carved from granite and greed, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sarah's entire year of rent. He was the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a real estate and tech conglomerate notorious for buying up historic neighborhoods and turning them into soulless glass towers. He wasn't alone. Trailing behind him, looking small and terrified, was a boy of about 10 years old. The boy, Leo, wore a blazer that was slightly too big for him, the sleeves swallowing his hands. He had messy dark hair and large, expressive eyes that darted around the room, taking in the crystal chandeliers and the staring faces with a mixture of wonder and anxiety. He didn't look at the people. He looked at the vibrations of the room, the movement. "Table 1, the VIP booth," Brenda commanded, snapping her fingers at Sarah. "You're taking them. And Sarah, do not mess this up. Sterling is meeting with Elias Graham in 45 minutes. If Sterling is unhappy, you're fired. If Graham is unhappy, we're all fired." Sarah took a deep breath, grabbing 2 menus and the heavy leather-bound wine list. "Understood." She walked over to the corner booth, the prime real estate of the restaurant, secluded by velvet ropes. Richard was already seated, aggressively typing on his phone, ignoring the boy who was struggling to climb onto the high velvet bench opposite him. "Welcome to L'Obsidienne, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, utilizing her customer service voice, bright, polite, and completely hollow. "My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you today." Richard didn't look up. He didn't even pause his typing. He just waved a hand dismissively in the air. "Water. Sparkling. No ice. And bring a bread basket, but take out the gluten stuff. I don't want the kid getting sluggish." Sarah glanced at the boy. Leo was looking at his father's face, waiting for visual cues, but Richard's head was down. The boy looked at Sarah. He offered a shy, hesitant smile. Sarah smiled back, a genuine warmth breaking through her mask. She placed a menu in front of Richard, and then turned to place one in front of Leo. "No," Richard barked, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, the color of dirty steel. "Don't bother giving him a menu. He can't read it." "Oh, I can explain the specials," Sarah began. "He's deaf," Richard said, the words dripping with irritation, as if his son's disability was a personal inconvenience to his lunch schedule. "And he's not ordering. He'll have the chicken breast, plain. Vegetables on the side. Pureed if you have them, so he doesn't make a mess." Sarah felt a prickle of heat on the back of her neck. The boy, Leo, was 10. He certainly didn't need pureed food like a toddler. She looked at Leo again. He was watching his father's lips intently, trying to lip read, but Richard was turning his head away, muttering into his Bluetooth earpiece. "Understood, sir," Sarah said tightly. "I'll get that water." She walked away, her fists clenching at her sides. She had served rude customers before. She had served divers, celebrities, and politicians. But there was something about the way Richard Sterling looked at his son, like the boy was a broken accessory he wanted to return to the store, that made her blood boil. By the time Sarah returned with the crystal bottle of San Pellegrino, the tension at table 1 was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. Richard was now fully engaged in a phone call, his voice booming across the dining section, oblivious to the annoyed glances from other patrons. "I don't care what the zoning commission says, Bill," Richard shouted. "Buy them out. Threaten to build a sewage plant next door. I want that land cleared by March." Leo sat in silence. He had taken a linen napkin and was folding it, meticulously creating an origami bird. His fingers were dexterous and quick. It was beautiful. He held it up, hoping to catch his father's eye. He tapped the table gently. Richard swatted the air without looking. "Stop fidgeting, Leo. Sit on your hands if you have to." Leo didn't hear the words, but he felt the vibration of the slap on the table and saw the angry scowl on his father's face. He dropped the napkin bird. It unraveled on the tablecloth. The boy shrank back, his shoulders hunching. Sarah approached the table, pouring the sparkling water with practiced precision. She noticed Leo watching the bubbles rise in the glass, fascinated. "Here you go," Sarah said softly, looking directly at Leo. Although he couldn't hear her, he saw her attention. He pointed to the bottle, then gave a thumbs up. Sarah smiled. She quickly checked to see if Richard was watching. He wasn't. He was busy berating Bill on the phone. Sarah raised her hand. She moved her palm flat against her chest and moved it in a circular motion. The ASL sign for please. Then she pointed to the bread basket she had brought and signed, "Eat." Leo's eyes went wide. It was like a light switch had been flipped inside him. The dull resignation vanished, replaced by a spark of shock and joy. He hurriedly signed back, his small hands moving in a blur. "You know sign?" Sarah gave a micro nod, placing a finger to her lips. "A little." She signed back discreetly, keeping the movement small, hidden by the height of the pepper grinder. "What are you doing?" Richard's voice cracked like a whip. Sarah froze. She turned to face him. Richard had ended his call and was staring at her with suspicion. "I was just ensuring the young man had everything he needed, sir," Sarah said, her voice calm. "Stop hovering," Richard sneered. "He doesn't need a babysitter. He needs to learn to sit still and not embarrass me. Elias Graham is going to be here in 10 minutes. If this kid spills anything, if he makes one grunt or noise, I'm taking it out of your tip. Do you understand?" "Sir," Sarah said, her professional mask slipping just a fraction. "He's just a child. He's bored." "He's a liability," Richard corrected her coldly. "Do you know how hard it is to secure a merger with Graham Industries? Elias Graham is old school. He cares about family values and legacy. I have to drag Leo here to play the part of the devoted father." He took a sip of his water and grimaced. "This isn't cold enough. I said no ice, but I expected it to be chilled." "Take it back." "It came from the cooler, Mr. Sterling." "Then the cooler is broken. Take it back." Sarah gritted her teeth. "Yes, sir." She reached for the bottle. At the same moment, Leo, sensing the tension and trying to be helpful, reached for his own glass to move it out of her way. His sleeve caught the edge of the heavy silver bread basket. It happened in slow motion. The basket tipped. A heavy, crusty baguette and 3 rolls tumbled out, knocking into Richard's tall glass of sparkling water. The glass tipped. Ice-cold carbonated water splashed directly into Richard's lap, soaking the crotch of his $3,000 suit trousers. The restaurant went silent. For 3 seconds, the only sound in L'Obsidian was the soft jazz playing over the speakers. Richard Sterling stood up so fast his chair screeched backward, slamming into the table behind him. He looked down at his soaked trousers, his face turning a shade of purple that matched the beets in the salad on table 5. "You stupid!" Richard roared, turning on Leo. Leo recoiled, covering his face with his hands. He couldn't hear the scream, but he could feel the rage radiating off his father like heat from an oven. "Mr. Sterling, please." Sarah stepped in between the man and the boy, holding up a towel. "It was an accident. He was trying to help." Richard slapped the towel out of her hand. "Help? He's useless. He's always been useless." He grabbed Leo by the shoulder, shaking him roughly. Leo let out a strangled cry, a guttural, unformed sound that often happens when deaf children are terrified and trying to vocalize. "Stop it!" Sarah yelled, dropping the customer service act entirely. "Let him go!" Brenda, the manager, came running over, her heels clicking frantically. Mr. Sterling, please, we are so sorry." "Sarah, get away from him. Get a dry cloth." "I don't want a dry cloth," Richard shouted, spinning around to face the entire dining room, enjoying the audience. "I want competent service, and I want a son who isn't a complete embarrassment." He pointed a finger at Sarah, jabbing it toward her face. "And you? You think you can tell me how to parent? You're a waitress. You carry plates for a living. You have 0 brain cells." "I am asking you to lower your voice," Sarah said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "You are frightening him." Richard laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Frightening him? He can't hear me. He lives in silence. He's broken." He leaned in close to Sarah, his breath smelling of coffee and mints. "You think you're so high and mighty, defending the poor disabled boy? You think you know what he wants?" Richard gestured wildly at Leo, who was now sobbing silently, tears streaming down his face, his hands moving frantically in signs that Richard didn't understand and didn't care to learn. "Look at him," Richard mocked. "He's waving his hands around like a monkey. Nobody knows what he's saying. He's probably asking for a toy or some candy." "He's not asking for candy," Sarah said quietly. "Oh, really?" Richard sneered. He looked around the restaurant, seeking validation from the other wealthy patrons. We have a waitress who thinks she's a whisperer. Go on then. Since you know so much, why don't you have a chat?" Richard grabbed Sarah's arm and shoved her slightly toward the crying boy. "Talk to my deaf son," Richard bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Talk to him. Go ahead. Mock me. Tell me what he's saying. If you're so smart, fix him. Talk to him." He laughed again, looking at Brenda. "Fire her. I want her gone. But first, let her humiliate herself. She can't talk to him any more than I can." Sarah stood still. She smoothed her apron. She looked at Richard Sterling, and for the first time she didn't see a billionaire. She saw a small, pathetic man. She took a deep breath. She turned her back on Richard completely. She knelt down on one knee, bringing herself to eye level with Leo. The restaurant watched, breathless. Sarah raised her hands. Her movements were sharp, fluid, and incredibly fast. It wasn't the basic sign language of a beginner. It was the fluent, emotive, rapid-fire signing of a master. "Leo," she signed, her face soft and expressive. "Look at me. Breathe. You are safe. I am here." Leo sniffled, wiping his eyes. He looked at her hands, stunned. "He is angry," Leo signed back, his fingers trembling. "I made a mess. I am stupid." Sarah shook her head firmly. "No, you are not stupid. It was an accident. The water dries. The glass can be replaced. You are important." The room was deadly silent. Even Richard had stopped shouting. He was staring at Sarah's hands, his mouth slightly open. Sarah continued, her hands moving with grace. "Your father is foolish. He shouts because he does not understand. But I understand. Tell me, what were you trying to say before, when you held up the bird?" Leo's eyes lit up. He signed quickly. "I wanted to tell him that I made the bird for him. To say sorry that Mum is gone. I miss her." Sarah felt her heart break. She swallowed the lump in her throat. She stood up slowly and turned to face Richard. The silence in the room was heavy, pressing down on them. "Well?" Richard demanded, though his voice lacked its earlier bite. He looked nervous. What is he doing? Just waving his hands? Sarah stared him dead in the eye. "He wasn't asking for candy, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice clear and projecting to every corner of the room. "And he wasn't asking for a toy." "Then what?" Richard challenged. He said. Sarah paused, letting the words hang. "He said he made the origami bird for you. He wanted to give it to you as a peace offering. He said he wanted to tell you he's sorry that his mother left, and that he misses her." A gasp rippled through the dining room. A woman at a nearby table covered her mouth. Richard's face went pale. "You're lying. You're making that up." "Am I?" Sarah asked. She turned back to Leo and signed, "Tell him about school." Leo signed emphatically. "I hate the boarding school. They tie my hands to stop me from signing. They force me to speak, but I cannot hear my voice. It hurts." Sarah translated, her voice turning ice cold. "He says he hates the boarding school you're sending him to. He says they tie his hands to stop him from using sign language. They are forcing him to speak orally, and it hurts him." "That's enough!" Richard snapped. "You're fired. Brenda, get security." "I'm not done," Sarah said, stepping forward. "He also says—" She looked at Leo one last time. Leo looked at his father, then signed one single powerful sign. He placed his hand over his heart, and then moved it outward, but then closed it into a fist. "He says he loves you," Sarah lied. She paused. "No, actually," Sarah corrected herself. "That's what he used to say. Just now, he said, 'Why does he hate me?'" Richard staggered back as if he'd been punched. "I don't hate him. I provide for him. I buy him everything." "You buy him silence," Sarah said. "You buy him isolation. You have a son who has a beautiful, complex language, and you haven't learned a single word of it in 10 years. You are the one who is disabled, Mr. Sterling. You're deaf to his heart." "Get out!" Richard screamed, losing control entirely. "Get out of this restaurant! You're finished in this city. I'll make sure you never work again." The heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant opened. A tall, elderly man with silver hair and a cane walked in, followed by 2 assistants. It was Elias Graham, the man Richard was desperate to impress, the man who valued legacy and family above all else. And he had been standing in the doorway for the last 3 minutes. Elias Graham didn't walk into a room. He occupied it. At 72 years old, the founder of Graham Industries carried an air of old-world authority that men like Richard Sterling could only mimic but never truly possess. He was leaning heavily on a cane topped with a silver hawk's head, and his eyes, sharp and blue, swept over the scene with the precision of a forensic auditor. Richard Sterling's face underwent a spasm of complex emotions: terror, rage, and a desperate, cloying attempt at charm. He smoothed his wet trousers, a futile gesture that only smeared the stain further. "Elias!" Richard exclaimed, his voice cracking an octave higher than usual. He stepped over the spilled bread rolls, extending a hand. "You're early. We were just having a small domestic situation. The staff here is incredibly incompetent. I was just about to have this waitress removed, so we could have a quiet lunch." Elias Graham did not take the outstretched hand. He stood perfectly still, looking at Richard's wet suit, then down at the terrified boy, and finally at Sarah, who was still standing protectively near Leo. "I have been standing there for 3 minutes, Richard," Elias said. His voice was gravelly and low, yet it carried more weight than Richard's shouting ever could. "I heard everything." Richard's smile faltered, twitching at the corners. "You heard? Well, then you saw how she provoked me. She was harassing my son. She claims to know sign language, but she's obviously making it up to humiliate me. She's probably an actress or a stalker looking for a payout." Elias ignored him. He took 2 slow steps toward Sarah. Brenda, the manager, rushed forward, wringing her hands. "Mr. Graham, on behalf of L'Obsidian, I apologize. This waitress is new. She is clearly unstable. We are firing her immediately. Security is on the way." "Quiet," Elias said. He didn't shout, but Brenda snapped her mouth shut instantly. Elias looked at Sarah. He studied her face, her stance, the way her hands were still slightly raised, ready to sign if needed. "You said the boy's name is Leo?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her legs. "And you claim he said he misses his mother?" "I don't claim it, sir. I translated it." Elias turned to Richard. "Richard, your wife, Victoria, she passed away 3 years ago, correct?" "Yes," Richard said, seizing the opening to play the victim. "Tragic accident. A car crash. It's been very hard on me. Raising a special needs child alone, it takes a toll. That's why I'm on edge. This woman took advantage of my grief." Elias turned back to Leo. The boy was shrinking into the velvet booth, eyes wide. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. He handed it to Leo. Then, Elias did something that made Richard's jaw drop. The old man raised his own hands. His fingers were stiff with age and arthritis, but the shapes were unmistakable. "Hello, Leo," Elias signed slowly. "I am a friend." Leo gasped. He dropped the handkerchief and signed back frantically. "You speak hands, too?" "A little," Elias signed, grimacing as his joints popped. "My grandson is deaf. I learned for him." Richard Sterling looked like he was about to vomit. The color drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure. Elias turned to Richard, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fire. I asked Leo a simple question just now. Richard, do you want to know what it was? Richard couldn't speak. He just nodded jerkily. I asked him if he wanted to go with you to the Hamptons this weekend, as you bragged to me on the phone yesterday, Elias said. And do you know what he said? Elias looked at the boy, then back at the father. He asked me, "Who are you?" He doesn't know who I am, Richard. You told me you and I were like family to him. You told me you talk about me all the time. But this boy has no idea who I am because you don't talk to him. You don't tell him anything. Elias, please. It's a misunderstanding. The deal is off. Elias cut him off. Graham Industries will not be merging with Sterling Dynamics. I don't do business with men who treat their children like broken appliances. And I certainly don't entrust my legacy to a man who lacks the basic decency to learn his own son's language. You can't do this! Richard lunged forward, grabbing Elias's arm. We have a verbal agreement. The board expects this. My stock will tank. One of Elias's bodyguards stepped forward, shoving Richard back into the table. The silverware clattered loudly. Touch me again, and you'll lose more than your stock, Elias warned. He adjusted his cuff. Come, Leo. I'm going to call your grandmother to come pick you up. You aren't safe with this man right now. No, Richard screamed. He's my son. You can't take him. Watch me, Elias said. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling Child Protective Services and my lawyers. Until they arrive, Leo stays with me. Richard looked around the room, realizing he had lost. The humiliation was total. He needed a scapegoat. He needed to hurt someone, anyone, to regain a shred of power. His eyes locked on Sarah. This is your fault, he hissed, pointing a trembling finger at her. You ruined this. You and your interference. He turned to Brenda. Fire her, now, or I sue this restaurant into the ground. I will claim she assaulted me. I will claim she poisoned my food. I will bury this place in litigation for a decade. Brenda, terrified and lacking any moral backbone, turned to Sarah. Her face was hard. Sarah, give me your apron. You're done. Get out. Now. But, Sarah started. Now, Brenda shrieked. And don't expect a paycheck. You just cost us our best client. Sarah looked at Elias, hoping he would intervene for her too. But Elias was busy on the phone, his back turned, shielding Leo. He had saved the boy, but Sarah was just collateral damage in a war between titans. She slowly unhitched her apron. She placed it on the table next to the spilled water. You're right, Brenda, Sarah said quietly. I don't belong here. She walked out of the dining room, past the staring customers, past the whispering hostesses. She walked out the back door into the alleyway, where the smell of garbage and rain greeted her. She leaned against the brick wall and slid down until she hit the wet pavement. She buried her face in her hands. She had stood up for what was right. She had given a voice to the voiceless. And now, she couldn't pay her rent. 3 days later, Sarah Miller was sitting on the floor of her tiny studio apartment in Queens, staring at a piece of toast that she was rationing for dinner. The apartment was dark. She hadn't turned on the lights to save electricity. The eviction notice was taped to her door, bright orange, impossible to ignore. She had 2 weeks to come up with 3 months of back rent, or she would be on the street. Her phone buzzed. It was the only thing she hadn't turned off. She ignored it. It was probably a bill collector. Or maybe her mother's care facility, calling to say the payments were late again. The guilt gnawed at her stomach, sharper than the hunger. The phone buzzed again. And again. And then it started ringing continuously. Sarah sighed and picked it up. It was her friend, Jenna. What, Jenna? Sarah answered, her voice raspy. I'm not in the mood. Sarah, have you been online? Jenna screamed into the phone. Have you seen it? Seen what? I don't have Wi-Fi anymore, Jenna. I cut it yesterday. Go to the library. Go to Starbucks. You're trending, Sarah. You're literally #1 on Twitter and YouTube." Sarah frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The restaurant. L'Obsidienne. Someone filmed it, Sarah. Someone filmed the whole thing." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Filmed what? Me getting fired?" "No. The speech, the sign language, the billionaire getting owned. It's everywhere. They're calling you the Waitress warrior. People are going crazy, but Sarah, you need to watch it, because Richard Sterling is fighting back." Sarah hung up. She grabbed her coat and ran out the door, down the block to the 24-hour bodega that had a public television and free Wi-Fi. She pulled out her cracked smartphone and connected. Her notifications were frozen, thousands of them flooding in at once. She opened YouTube. There it was, a video titled, "Billionaire Bullies Deaf Son, Waitress Destroys Him." It had 14 million views in 24 hours. Sarah tapped it. The video was shaky, clearly filmed covertly from a nearby table, but the audio was crisp. She saw herself kneeling. She saw her hands moving. She heard her voice, strong and clear. "You buy him silence. You buy him isolation." She scrolled down to the comments. "This woman is a hero. Who is she?" "Richard Sterling is a monster. Boycott Sterling Dynamics." I'm crying. She understood the boy when his own dad didn't. But then she saw the recommended video next to it. It was a clip from a major news network, uploaded 2 hours ago. Richard Sterling responds. She was a deranged stalker. Sarah's hands shook as she clicked on it. Richard Sterling was sitting in a studio, looking somber and victimized. He was wearing a modest blue sweater, not a suit. His hair was slightly messy, as if he had been up all night worrying. "It's easy to edit a video to make someone look bad," Richard said smoothly to the sympathetic news anchor. "The truth is, this woman, Ms. Miller, has been stalking my family for months. She targeted my son because he is vulnerable. She learned a few signs to trick him. In the restaurant, she threatened to hurt him if I didn't give her money. I was yelling because I was a terrified father protecting his child." "That is a serious accusation," the anchor said. "It is." Richard nodded gravely. "And we found out she is a medical school dropout. She was kicked out for unethical behavior. She is dangerous. I am currently filing a restraining order and suing her for defamation and emotional distress." Sarah dropped the phone. It clattered onto the linoleum floor of the bodega. "Lies," she whispered. "It's all lies." He was rewriting reality. He was using his millions to paint her as a villain, a predator. He was going to crush her. The bodega owner, an older man named Mr. Henderson, looked over the counter. "You okay, Sarah? You look like you saw a ghost." "He's lying," Sarah said, tears welling up. "I didn't stalk him. I was just doing my job." Suddenly, a black sedan pulled up to the curb outside the bodega. The windows were tinted darker than midnight. 2 men in suits got out. They weren't police. They looked like corporate sharks, sharp, expensive, and dangerous. They walked straight into the bodega. Mr. Henderson reached for the baseball bat he kept under the counter. "Sarah Miller?" the taller of the 2 men asked. Sarah backed up against the rack of potato chips. "Who are you? Did Richard send you?" "No," the man said. He held up a business card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing. Sebastian Vance and Associates, attorneys at law. "My name is Sebastian Vance," the man said. "I represent the estate of the late Victoria Sterling, Leo's mother." Sarah blinked. "I don't understand." "Mrs. Sterling's will was complicated," Sebastian said, his voice low. "She left the entirety of her family fortune, including the controlling interest in Sterling Dynamics, to her son, Leo. But she placed it in a trust." "So?" Sarah asked. "So, Sebastian continued, stepping closer. Richard Sterling only has access to that money as long as he is the primary guardian of the child. If he loses custody, or if he is proven to be an unfit parent, he loses everything. The company, the houses, the jet. He becomes penniless. Sarah's mind raced. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Sebastian said, a small, grim smile touching his lips. "Richard knows this. That's why he's trying to destroy you. That video isn't just embarrassing for him, Sarah. It's evidence. It's the smoking gun we've been waiting for to remove him as trustee." "I can't fight him," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I have $11 in my bank account. He's on the news calling me a stalker." "You don't have to fight him alone," Sebastian said. "I'm not here to ask you to testify, Sarah. I'm here to offer you a job." "A job?" Victoria Sterling's will had a clause. If Richard was ever deemed unfit, the trust mandates the hiring of a communication specialist and a live-in guardian approved by the executor, me, to ensure Leo's well-being until he is 18. Sebastian extended a hand. "The pay is $10,000 a month, plus housing at the Sterling estate. But there's a catch." "What's the catch?" Sarah asked. "You have to move into the lion's den," Sebastian said. "The court granted an emergency motion this morning based on the video. Richard can't fire you. He can't evict you. He has to live with you in his house, watching you care for the son he ignored, and if he tries to sabotage you, he goes to jail." Sarah looked at the card. She looked at her phone, where Richard's lying face was still paused on the screen. She thought of Leo, the little boy with the sad eyes, who just wanted his dad to love him. She thought of her own mother and the medical bills piling up. She wiped her tears. She stood up straight. "When do I start?" The Sterling estate was not a home. It was a mausoleum built for the living. Located in the most exclusive enclave of the Hamptons, it was a sprawling structure of glass, steel, and cold grey stone that seemed to frown at the ocean. Sarah Miller stood at the massive iron gates, her small suitcase sitting on the gravel beside her. The wind whipped her hair across her face, carrying the salt spray from the Atlantic, but she didn't shiver from the cold. She shivered from the realization of what she had just agreed to. She was moving in with the enemy. A buzzer sounded, harsh and abrasive. The gates groaned open slowly. The walk up the driveway felt like a march to the gallows. When she reached the front door, it was opened not by Richard, but by a housekeeper who looked as tired and worn as the limestone steps. "Ms. Miller," the woman said, her voice a hush. "I am Martha. Mr. Sterling is expecting you in the study. Please leave your bag here. Do not touch the walls." Sarah stepped inside. The foyer was breathtakingly expensive and utterly soul-crushing. The floors were black marble, polished to a mirror shine. There were no family photos, no coats on the rack, no toys. It was a showroom, devoid of life. Sarah was led to a set of double mahogany doors. Martha knocked once and scurried away, clearly terrified of being caught in the crossfire. "Enter!" Richard's voice came from within. Sarah pushed the doors open. Richard Sterling was standing by the fireplace, nursing a tumbler of amber liquid. He didn't look up. He stared into the flames, his posture rigid. "Let's get one thing straight," Richard said, the ice in his glass clinking as he swirled it. "You are not a guest here. You are an unwanted necessity, a parasite forced upon me by a dead woman's lawyers and a corrupt legal system." He finally turned to face her. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. "I am here to do a job, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, keeping her chin up. "I am here to ensure Leo has access to language and emotional support, something you have failed to provide." Richard laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You think you're a savior. You're a waitress. Do you know why I haven't fired you yet? Because Sebastian Cole, that vulture of a lawyer, tied my hands. If I fire you, I violate the trust clause. If I violate the trust, I lose the company. I lose the house. I lose everything. He walked closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. But, Richard whispered, if you quit, if you decide the pressure is too much, if you make a mistake, then I am free. And mark my words, Sarah, I will make you quit. I will make your life in this house a living hell until you run back to whatever slum you crawled out of. I don't scare easily, Sarah lied. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. We'll see, Richard sneered. Your room is in the servants' quarters in the basement. Leo is in the west wing. You are to speak to me only when spoken to. You are not to eat at my table. And if you break a single item in this house, I will dock it from your pay until you are working for free. Where is Leo? Sarah asked, ignoring his threats. In his room, or his cell as you'd probably call it. Richard waved a hand dismissively. Go. Get out of my sight. Sarah turned and left the study. She navigated the labyrinthine hallways until she found the west wing. The door to Leo's room was closed. She knocked gently. There was no answer, of course. She opened it. The room was enormous, filled with top-of-the-line toys, drones, video game consoles, an electric car. But they were all still in their boxes, unopened. Leo was sitting on the floor in the corner, facing the wall. He was rocking back and forth. Sarah knelt down and tapped the floorboards. The vibration made Leo turn. His face was tear-stained. When he saw Sarah, his eyes widened in disbelief. He rubbed them, thinking he was dreaming. Sarah, he signed, his small fingers trembling. Sarah smiled, her eyes filling with tears. Hello, Leo. I live here now. I am your teacher. Leo launched himself at her, wrapping his arms around her neck. He buried his face in her shoulder and sobbed, a silent, shaking release of years of loneliness. Sarah held him tight. I've got you, she thought, and I'm not going anywhere. The next 2 weeks were a psychological war zone. Richard was true to his word. He made the environment hostile in 1,000 subtle ways. He ordered the heating in the servants' quarters turned off, leaving Sarah to sleep in a freezing room with only thin blankets. He instructed the chef to cook meals laden with dairy, which he knew Sarah was mildly intolerant to, forcing her to cook for herself and Leo in the middle of the night. He would storm into lessons, disrupting the peace, criticizing Leo's posture, or mocking the sign language they were practicing. "Stop flapping your hands!" Richard would yell as he walked past the library where they studied. It looks ridiculous. But Sarah held firm. She bought a space heater with her own money. She cooked simple meals for Leo, grilled cheese, tomato soup, things he actually liked. And Leo blossomed. For the first time in his life, he had language. Sarah taught him ASL at a breakneck speed. The boy was a sponge, starving for communication. Within 10 days, he could tell her about his dreams, his fears, and his favorite animals. He told her about the day his mother died, how Richard had forbidden him from crying at the funeral, because it looked weak. But the real turning point came on a rainy Thursday. Richard had hosted a small dinner party for some potential investors. He had strictly forbidden Leo from coming downstairs. "Stay in your room," Richard had ordered. "You'll only embarrass me." But Leo needed water. Around 8:30 p.m., he crept downstairs to the kitchen. He didn't know the investors were in the dining room. As he walked past the open dining room doors, one of the investors, a heavy-set man named Mr. Henderson, spotted him. "Well, look who it is," Henderson boomed. "The heir apparent." Leo froze. He couldn't hear the words, but he felt the eyes on him. Richard stood up, his face flushing red. He rushed over to Leo, grabbing him by the arm. "Go upstairs. Now." Leo, frightened by the sudden aggression, pulled back. In the struggle, his elbow hit a pedestal holding a Ming vase. The vase wobbled. Sarah, who had been serving wine in the background, another degradation Richard insisted on, dropped her tray and dove. She caught the vase inches from the marble floor. She landed hard on her hip, sliding across the floor, but the vase was safe. The room went silent. "My God," Henderson said. "Good catch, miss." Richard looked down at Sarah, then at the terrified Leo. He didn't see a saved vase. He saw a loss of control. "You clumsy idiot," Richard hissed at Sarah. "You nearly destroyed a $50,000 antique." "I saved it," Sarah snapped, standing up and handing the vase to a stunned Martha. "And maybe if you didn't grab your son like a criminal, he wouldn't be scared of you." "Get out," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. "Both of you." Sarah took Leo's hand and led him upstairs. Later that night, Sarah was in the kitchen washing dishes. Richard walked in. He was drunk. "You think you're winning," Richard slurred. "You think because the boy likes you, you're safe." "I think I'm doing the job his mother wanted," Sarah said, scrubbing a pot vigorously. Richard's face twisted. "Don't you speak her name. Victoria was weak. She coddled him. She wanted him to be this." He gestured vaguely, mimicking sign language, mockingly. "She refused the cochlear implants. She refused the surgeries. She wanted a deaf culture child. I wanted a sterling." "He is a sterling," Sarah said. "He's brilliant. He's kind. He's an artist. Have you seen his drawings? He draws you, you know. He draws you as a superhero. He still thinks you can save the world." Richard paused. For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Regret? Shame? But then he hardened. "Enjoy your night, Sarah," he said coldly. "Tomorrow is going to be a very bad day for you." He walked out. Sarah felt a pit in her stomach. She went to her room, double-locked the door, and checked the hidden nanny cam she had installed in her own suitcase, a suggestion from Sebastian Cole. The next morning, chaos erupted at 7 a.m. 2 police officers were standing in the foyer. Richard Sterling was pointing a finger at Sarah, who had just come up from the basement in her robe. "That's her!" Richard shouted. "That's the thief!" Sarah blinked, confused. "What is going on?" "We received a call about a grand larceny," the officer said, stepping forward. "Mr. Sterling claims a diamond watch, valued at $200,000, is missing from his safe. He claims he saw you leaving his study late last night." "That's a lie," Sarah cried. "I haven't been in his study since the day I arrived." "We need to search your room, ma'am," the officer said. "Go ahead," Sarah said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I have nothing to hide." They went down to the small, cold basement room. The officer opened Sarah's suitcase. He rummaged through her clothes. He pulled out a sock. Inside the sock was the diamond watch. Richard stood in the doorway, a smug smile plastered on his face. "Well, well, caught red-handed. I knew you were trash, stealing from the hand that feeds you." Sarah stared at the watch. She looked at Richard. She realized this was his plan. This was the very bad day. A felony charge. Prison. Leo left alone with him forever. "Officer, arrest her," Richard commanded, "and I want her removed from the premises immediately. This voids the trust agreement. No criminal can be a guardian." The officer pulled out handcuffs. "Sarah Miller, turn around." "Wait," Sarah said. Her voice was surprisingly calm. She reached into her pocket, she was wearing her robe, and pulled out her phone. "Before you arrest me," Sarah said, I think you should look at the footage from the camera I installed in this room. Richard's smile vanished. What? I knew he would try something, Sarah said to the officer. Mr. Sterling threatened me multiple times. So I bought a motion-activated camera. It's sitting right there on the bookshelf, hidden in the spine of that book. She pointed to a thick copy of Jane Eyre. Sarah opened the app on her phone. She pressed play on the clip from 3 a.m. The officer leaned in. Richard turned pale. On the screen, in grainy night vision, the door to Sarah's room opened. Richard Sterling crept in, wearing his silk pajamas. He looked around nervously. He opened the suitcase, pulled out the sock, stuffed the watch inside, and then crept out. The silence in the basement was deafening. The officer looked up from the phone. He looked at Richard Sterling with a mixture of disgust and professional resolve. "Mr. Sterling," the officer said, his hand moving to his belt. "Is that you in the video?" Richard stammered. "It's doctored. Deep fake. AI. She's a hacker." "It's time-stamped and uploaded to the cloud," Sarah said, "and I just forwarded it to Sebastian Cole." The end of Richard Sterling did not happen with a bang, but with a series of legal papers served over the next 48 hours. Sebastian Cole arrived at the mansion with a team of lawyers and social workers. The video of the frame-up was the final nail in the coffin. Richard was not just removed as the trustee, he was arrested for filing a false police report, attempted framing, and, upon further investigation by Sebastian's team, embezzlement of funds from Leo's trust to cover his gambling debts. The confrontation happened in the foyer, the same place Sarah had first entered. Richard was in handcuffs this time. He looked smaller, shrunken inside his expensive suit. As the officers led him away, he stopped. He looked at Leo, who was standing at the top of the stairs, holding Sarah's hand. Richard opened his mouth to speak, maybe to beg, maybe to scream. Leo raised his hands. "Goodbye, Father," Leo signed. It was a simple, final motion. Richard looked at Sarah. "You ruined my life." "No, Richard," Sarah said softly. "You did that all by yourself. I just turned on the lights." The heavy oak doors closed behind him. 6 months later, the atmosphere at L'Obsidienne was buzzing, but this time the vibe was different. Sarah Miller walked in, but she wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a tailored navy dress. She wasn't serving the tables. She was sitting at the best one, Table 1, the VIP booth. Sitting across from her was Leo. He looked healthy, happy, and vibrant. He was laughing, signing rapidly to Sebastian Cole, who sat beside him. "So," Sebastian signed, "are you ready for the art show tomorrow?" "Yes," Leo signed enthusiastically. "I have 5 paintings on display. Sarah says I'm going to be famous." Sarah laughed, reaching out to ruffle Leo's hair. "I said you're already famous, kiddo. The art world loves you." The court had granted full legal guardianship to Sarah, with the trust fully funding their lives. They had sold the Coldhamptons estate and bought a warm, vibrant brownstone in Brooklyn, with a massive garden and an art studio for Leo. Sarah had gone back to medical school, studying part-time while managing Leo's care. Brenda, the manager who had fired Sarah, walked by the table. She looked nervous. She placed a complimentary bottle of vintage champagne on the table. "Compliments of the house, Ms. Miller," Brenda said, her voice shaking slightly. "We are so honored to have you back." Sarah looked at the bottle. Then she looked at Brenda. "Thank you, Brenda," Sarah said, with a graceful smile. "But Leo prefers sparkling cider. And please bring the bread basket, the gluten-free one." Brenda nodded frantically and rushed away. Sarah looked at Leo. He was folding a napkin. He made a bird. He placed it in Sarah's hand. "For you," he signed. "Because you heard me." Sarah closed her hand around the paper bird. She looked out the window at the New York skyline. The city was loud, chaotic, and relentless. But inside their little circle there was understanding, there was love, and most importantly, there was no longer any silence. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how a billionaire lost his empire because he refused to listen, and how a waitress found her destiny by simply paying attention. Richard Sterling thought power came from shouting orders, but Sarah proved that true power comes from understanding those who cannot speak. Today, Leo is a thriving artist in New York, and Sarah is finishing her degree to become a pediatrician specializing in deaf care. They proved that family isn't about blood. It's about who stands by you when the world tries to silence you. If you were Sarah, would you have taken the job in the mansion knowing Richard was trying to destroy you? Or would you have taken the money and run? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the arrogant always fall eventually. And make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.